What's going on, everybody? This is part 3 of our 3-part Crested Gecko series. And in case you missed it, the first 2 videos were all about how to breed Crested Geckos and how to be ready for them, how to prep them, everything like that. The second video was all about how to prepare the eggs and incubate the eggs and get the eggs ready to hatch and things like that. Today we're going to be talking about how to take care of your hatchlings. So if that's something you're interested in, stick around. Alright, so your baby Crested Gecko finally hatched out of the egg. What are you supposed to do now? Well, don't panic, don't worry. It's not that much different than an adult care. There is some other special needs that they do have, but it's very similar to the adults and it's nothing to stress over. So basically, once they hatch out of the egg, for the first 12 to 24 hours, you're going to want to leave them in the incubator. That way they can have their first shed. So after those 12 to 24 hours, you can put them in their tank. Basically, something like this. So this is what I have all my babies in. I always put them in these, I think they're extra small critter keepers. It could be a small, I'd have to double check. But basically this is how I set up my critter keepers for them. Basically what I do is I fill almost half of it on the bottom with wet moss, and then I will dampen that every single day, probably 2 to 3 times a day, depending on how wet it is in there. You do want to let it dry out a little bit, but you cannot let them get too dry, because when they are babies, they will tend to dry out faster and you can actually dehydrate them if you don't keep something moist in there. So I typically, for the babies, like I said, I will keep half of the bottom of their enclosure moss. That way it's nice and wet for them, and they can go in there if they're having any suck shed issues. They typically won't get dehydrated, and it's just better overall if you can do that. I also like to include something that they can climb on. So this is just a little piece of a vine that I ended up cutting, and then making sure that little sharp part that's inside of those bendable vines didn't come out or anything like that. So I cut it a little bit deeper down in there so they couldn't go in there or anything like that. And I also put that in here so they could climb on it, because like I said, they do need somewhere to climb other than just the walls. And I also put this little plant on there so they can get some, like a drink off of the leaves or things like that, and they can climb up on that too. So like we were saying, you want roughly a 2.5 to 5 gallon enclosure for them. Half moss, something to climb, and then I typically will put some sort of leaves or greenery in there too. That way it's more natural for them. If you are using a critter keeper, it is important to remember that you will need to watch the humidity, like I said, because you don't want them to dry out. And since the critter keeper has that whole entire open top, it does have increased odds of having the humidity escape more than you would in a different container. For instance, this is Kwame's tank right here. And all Kwame has on his tank are these little holes on the top. So his enclosure actually holds a lot more humidity than a lot of the other baby and smaller Crested Geckos that I have, because it doesn't have that open top on it to where all the humidity will escape. So you do want to be more mindful. Obviously, you need to watch, for me personally, I need to watch Kwame's tank, and I also need to watch theirs, that they get enough humidity, and also that Kwame doesn't have too much humidity and he's just sitting in 90% humidity all day. So that is important to make sure, whatever tank you do end up using, that you are on top of the humidity and you make sure they're not drying out or being too wet all the time. So after you have them in their enclosure, after the 12 to 24 hours, then you will probably want to feed them. I typically will feed probably 36 hours after they hatch. I typically don't do the 48 hours and I don't do the 24. So I do right in the middle, and I do 36 hours after they hatch. And that is the fun part, because when you have to feed baby Crested Geckos, you have to hand feed them at first, I think. Now this is, again, debatable. Some people say that they should be able to find it on their own. I like to be safe, and I like to make sure that they're strong and healthy, and I don't want to really risk anything, so I will always hand feed. And then as they get older, I gradually will start letting them try to get the food on their own. I'll still hand feed a couple days a week, but typically, like what I'm doing with the baby that I just had hatch out not too long ago, I'll feed for 3 days in a row, and then I'll skip 1 day and I won't put any food in there. For 2 of those days that I'm feeding, I will hand feed, and then the other day I will not hand feed, and then I will skip a day. Now, in a couple months, or in a month or so probably actually, is when I'm going to start feeding 1 time, skipping 2 times, and then I will not feed at all for that 4th day. And that's kind of the schedule that I do. Once it becomes probably 2 months old, probably, is when I'm going to let it pretty much start eating fully on its own. Occasionally I'll just go in there and make sure that it's eating. So feeding, I basically just use Pangea. Pangea is the easiest. I pour a little bit of Pangea into a Tupperware container, add a little bit of water, and I stir it up. You're looking for ketchup consistency. So once you get that ketchup consistency, you are good. But after you make it, just make sure that you do put your food that you made back into the fridge, because it will go bad, but it will stay for about a week in the fridge. So if you can make it ahead of time, it is way easier come feeding time on you. So basically, my food dishes for all of my crested geckos are water caps. I will just take the food and put it in there, and then they will go to it, and it's like a little water dish for them. As soon as you're done the following night, you just take it and you can throw it away, and you don't need to wash anything or anything like that. That's pretty much the easiest way you're going to be able to do it. Everybody, I feel like, has water bottles laying around. If you don't, you can end up reusing them, because once the food dries, because eventually it will dry if you leave it sit out long enough, you can pretty much scrape it out and you can quickly just wash it, and then you're good to go to reuse it. So basically what I will do once I have the food ready, like I was saying, is I will take a little like metal scooper that I have, and I will just take a little bit on there, and I will go to the crested gecko, and I will put it right in front of its face. That way it can kind of smell it and know, oh, that's my food. And then typically what mine will do, will start to lick it. Some people will just take the food and put it on the crested gecko's nose. I personally like to let some of their natural instincts kick in, because I am hand feeding, and that's not really natural for the crested geckos. So what I like to do is I like to hold it in front of them and let them kind of come to it, but you're still kind of putting it right in front of their face, so they're not really coming to it. But as they get older, they will start to learn, and then that's when you can kind of stop hand feeding and kind of just let them eat on their own. Now, as adults, as most people know, you feed them every other day, so it's a little bit easier when they're adults, because you don't have to hand feed them and you feed every other day. Now, also an important thing to remember when feeding your crested geckos is a lot of people worry about, is my gecko eating? Because they're so small, I can't really tell if they're eating. Don't worry. If you are noticing poop, that is a very good sign. It's going to look like little mouse turds probably. A lot of people will worry about, oh, is my crested gecko eating? They're so small, I can't tell if they're eating anything. And what I say to that is, as long as you're seeing poop, you know that they're eating, because they're pooping something out. Now, if your crested gecko, if you're worried, is not really eating and they're super lazy and you don't see any poop, then you might want to make sure that you're giving them enough food. But if you see poop and they're pooping and they're pretty energetic, then you know that they are actually eating. And then just for cleanliness, after you do start to see those poops, you do want to take little tongs or whatever you have to get out the poop and just take that out. And then I typically will replace the substrate, which is on the bottom. I just use paper towels. I will typically replace that weekly. And then if you are interested in feeding live bugs, you want to wait until they're about a month old, and then the size appropriate. So you kind of want to give them anything that can fit in their mouth. That's usually the space between their eyes, because you don't really want them to choke on it, obviously. So usually the space between their eyes means that they can swallow it. So if you do feed them any type of worm or cricket, just make sure the worm is small enough. If not, you can always, like a mealworm or anything like that, you can just cut it in half and make sure that it is small enough, or cut it in quarters, whatever you need to do, just to make sure that they don't choke on it. And if you are feeding crickets, just make sure they're obviously small enough to where the crested gecko can get them. So another reason why it's important to have your scale, like I said in my first video, which if you didn't watch that, you should watch that. I'll put the link to the first 2 parts of this 3-part series in the description for you guys. But the reason that is important to have a scale is that you can weigh them. Now, the babies are going to be, they're considered the hatchlings from 0 to 10 grams. From 11 to 34 is considered a juvenile, and then 35 and up is considered adult. And then, as you guys know, 35 to 40 grams and up is generally when they can start breeding, so that's why they are considered the adult at that age. For juvenile crested geckos, which are anything from like 11 grams to about 34 grams, somewhere in there, you're going to want to use roughly like a 10 gallon, but vertically. So instead of having like a 10 gallon fish tank, you just want it vertical. And then you can actually go a little bit, you don't have to have the moss. I typically will always have the moss or like a container, like a humid hide kind of for them, just in case they do have any problems with the stuck shed, or they just want to go down in there, or for the females to lay their eggs into. It's super easy just to have a little container with moss in it. Depending on the size tank, some people will just use Tupperware containers and then cut out a hole in the top and fill it with moss. Spray down once a day for them. Some people will use the smaller critter keepers like I showed in my first or actually the first or second video, I can't remember. They're both in the description anyway. And having that critter keeper in there for them will help them with any stuck shed, like I was saying, or anything like that, and to lay their eggs in. So it's very beneficial for you because it's very easy to just go in there, find the egg, pull them out, and then incubate them. So for one single adult, I will keep mine in an 18 by 18 by 24. Typically, that's a pretty good size for one. I don't really recommend doing any more than that. If you do have like a breeding pair, like I had two in one of those one time, I would up the cleanings to probably twice a week instead of once a week. So it's every 3-ish days, I would say, because once you have more than one in there, it does get significantly more messy. So you do want to make sure they stay nice and clean and poop free and everything like that. But also, if you do have a male and a female you're trying to breed and you do have them in one tank, just make sure you do have another tank for the male because you will need to separate them, obviously, when they're not breeding. And that's basically it. That's how you breed crested geckos. It's not easy like I was saying in the other videos. Nope. It's not hard like I was saying in the other videos. It's pretty simple. Once you know it, it's not really something that you forget. And if anybody asks you, it's pretty self-explanatory to let anybody know. So if you guys did enjoy these videos, please like, share, subscribe, comment. I'm still looking for names for the 2 baby crested geckos that we have. So if you guys have any name ideas, drop those down in the comments. And I hope you guys enjoyed this 3-part series. If you did, please give me a like. Also, really quickly, I do want to say again, I do not condone breeding just to randomly breed or just to sell for profit. If you are going to breed, please do it for the right reasons and create healthy geckos. Take your time, do the research, and just make sure you're doing everything right and healthy. Thank you guys again for watching the video. If you did like what you saw, and you did like some of the other stuff we have on the channel, like Fat Tootie, I know she's getting a ton of views right now, the ball python, the reptiles, all the other dogs, anything like that, please subscribe. Like the video, share, comment. I love hearing from people. So thank you guys, and we will see you in the next one.